Niki Lauda's rise to Formula One was extraordinarily meteoric, the Austrian making his Grand Prix debut on home soil at the Oostenrijk Ring on August 15, 1971, just over 3 years after his first tentative steps in a local hill climb. In between times, he'd enjoyed modest successes in Formula V and national sports car events, and had gained valuable race experience in international Formula 3 and Formula 2. Thanks to a giddy bank loan, he secured a full-time drive with March for the 1972 season, combining his Formula 1 activities with a full Formula 2 programme. His best Formula 1 result would be a 7th place in the South African Grand Prix. In 1973, he talked his way into the ailing BRM team, scoring his first World Championship points by finishing 5th at Zolder. He gave several demonstrations of his potential, however reliability problems led to numerous retirements. When BRM teammate Clay Regazzoni left to join Ferrari at the end of the season, he recommended the 24-year-old Austrian to Enzo Ferrari, legendary figurehead of the charismatic Italian team. Lauda was duly recruited for the 1974 season, a time of wholesale change for Ferrari. After 4 largely barren years, the dynamic Luca di Montezemolo had been brought in as team director. He and Lauda immediately struck up an excellent working relationship as they tried to put Ferrari back on the right track. Justification of Ferrari's faith in Lauda wasn't long coming. He finished second first time out in Argentina and scored his maiden Formula One victory, only the 4th single-seater triumph of his whole career, in Spain at a sodden Hirama. The seeds of success were sown. Throughout the season, the Ferraris were fast, if fragile. They monopolised the front row of the grid at Monaco, only for ignition trouble to remove Lauda from contention. Regazzoni plugged on to finish 4th, having been delayed by an early spin. After his triumph in Spain, in fact, Niki couldn't win again until the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort late in June, though he drew satisfaction from second-place finishes in France and Belgium. By the time the teams arrived in North America for the final 2 races of the year, Lauda and Regazzoni were still both in firm contention for the title. An accident in Canada ended the Austrians' championship aspirations, however, leaving Regazzoni, who had won only 1 race in Germany, but who had a better finishing record, to carry Italian hopes to the season finale at Watkins Glen. Level pegging with McLaren's Emerson Fittipaldi prior to the race, Regazzoni had to give best to the Brazilian on the day and conceded the title by just 3 points. Encouraged by this return to competitiveness, Lauda's victory in Spain had been the team's first success since the 1972 German Grand Prix. Ferrari worked hard over the winter to ensure that the new 312T chassis would take over where its predecessor had left off. It did. The following year, Lauda proved to be almost unstoppable, despite an indifferent start. He had finished in the points in the opening 3 races, without ever challenging for victory. In Spain, he and Regazzoni qualified on the front row of the grid, but wasted the effort when they collided with each other in a start line melee. The Austrian's luck swung dramatically upwards in Monte Carlo, where he scored the first of 5 Grand Prix victories, 3 of them, Belgium, Sweden and France, following in the next 4 races. Lauda's astonishing run of mid-season form was interrupted only in Holland, where James Hunt gave the Hesketh mark its only Grand Prix victory, after an epic battle with Lauda's Ferrari, a portent of the healthy rivalry that would develop between the two drivers. At the Nürburgring, Lauda looked set to add to his tally of victories until he became the latest of several drivers to collect a puncture. Luckily, given the fact that the circuit is 14 miles long, he was close enough to the pits to be able to nurse the car in. He eventually resumed to finish third, maintaining his healthy championship lead. The scene was set for Ferrari to clinch its first world title since 1964 at Monza on home soil. It could hardly have been choreographed better. Lauda became the idol of the fanatical Italian public when he drove a tactical race to finish third behind teammate Regazzoni and championship rival Emerson Fittipaldi, thus assuring himself of the crown. At the end of the race, the Monza crowd, showing all its usual restraint, swarmed onto the circuit almost the second the race finished and mobbed both Ferrari drivers. Victory in the Italian Grand Prix, the World Drivers' title and success for Ferrari in a World Constructors' Championship, all in one afternoon. For the Tifosi, it was a day of unfettered celebration. In Italy, Lauda had become incredibly popular in a very short space of time, perhaps more quickly than any driver who had gone before.
Chi va fortissimo, lui ha guidato molto bene questo anno, l'organizzazione della squadra Ferrari è andata molto bene, ma c'è una netta differenza tra i motori.
To stamp his authority on a season in which he had taken 9 pole positions in 14 races, Lauda ended on a champagne note, scoring a 5th win in the United States Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, leaving him 19.5 points clear of closest rival Fittipaldi.
He's offering one of his crewmen a drink. He gets a little down the front of his shirt. The race from starting flag to finish flag was yours.
Away from the glare of race weekends, Lauda knuckled down to a hectic test programme, principally at Fiorano, Ferrari's own private test track. In addition to his recognised qualities as a racing champion, the Austrian also proved himself to be a shrewd and meticulous development driver, a gift that is not common to all racing drivers. Lauda persisted with his rigorous testing schedule throughout the closed season, in a bid to maintain Ferrari's momentum and to pave the way for a second consecutive championship win. All the same, 1976 kicked off much as the previous season had finished. Still running the 312T chassis, Lauda won in Brazil and South Africa, Regazzoni in Long Beach. In Spain, where Ferrari competed with the new 312T2 for the first time, Lauda drove with a painful rib injury after overturning a tractor at home, yet still he finished second. Further victories soon amassed in Belgium, despite continual aggravation from his ribs, in Monte Carlo and later in Great Britain. The Italo-Austrian alliance looked to be in great form, and few imagined that the world title could possibly go elsewhere. However, James Hunt, winner in Spain for McLaren, repeated that success in the French Grand Prix, building a platform from which to launch his own World Championship assault. Lauda and Regazzoni had another first corner tangle at Brands Hatch, provoking a chain reaction amongst the cars behind, but champions' luck appeared to be on Lauda's side. The race was restarted. Hunt won on the road, but was later disqualified on a technicality when the stewards decreed he hadn't been eligible to take the restart, handing victory to Lauda. That piece of good fortune was quickly forgotten. The next race was at the Nürburgring in Germany, the longest and most challenging and, many suggested, most dangerous track on the schedule. A circuit which certain parties felt was no longer capable of staging a Formula One race in safety. On August the 1st, with 7 races still to go, Lauda's title hopes appeared to be lost when his Ferrari slewed out of control at the Bergwerk corner and slammed into the guardrail, rebounding in flames into the centre of the track. Lauda's helmet was ripped off in the impact, but prompt action from fellow drivers Guy Edwards, Brett Lunger, Harold Ertl and Arturo Mazzario, all of whom had collided with the wreckage, facilitated Lauda's removal from the inferno. The Austrian received horrific burns, and the initial prognosis was that he had little chance of survival. The nature of his injuries was such that a priest was called to administer the last rites. And that marked the start of an extraordinary recovery, which proved that Lauda could be every bit as determined off the track as he could on it. Unbelievably, on September the 10th, at Monza of all places, he calmly renewed acquaintance with his Ferrari. It was just 40 days after the accident which had so nearly claimed his life. On his return, Lauda finished a remarkable 4th. He still led the championship, but James Hunt had narrowed the points gap in his absence, setting up a dramatic championship finale in Japan, which was staging a World Championship Formula One event for the very first time in the shadow of Mount Fuji. On a circuit made treacherous by torrential rain, Lauda pulled into the pits after 2 laps and stepped out of the cockpit. His explanation was blunt and typically honest. It was, he felt, too dangerous to race in such conditions. Hunt splashed on to finish 3rd, enough to give him the title by just 1 point. The relationship between Lauda and Ferrari grew brittle in the winter of '76. Ferrari wanted to replace Regazzoni with the Argentinian Carlos Reutemann. Lauda wanted Regazzoni to stay. The two parties agreed to disagree. Having threatened at one point to leave, the Austrian eventually stayed on. Eventually, it was to be a satisfactory year from the racing point of view. The Nürburgring crash was gradually forgotten, and Lauda's rapport with the partisan Italian fans, which had been shaken by his decision to quit in Japan, was strengthened once more. Despite his performances on the track, however, he had had enough of Ferrari's internal politics. '77 got off to a promising start for Ferrari. Reutemann was 3rd in Argentina and won in Brazil. Lauda took a little longer to get back to his dazzling form of old, but he won round 3 in South Africa and remained firmly in title contention thanks to a string of points finishes in mid-season, managing to maintain his concentration despite burgeoning interests outside the sport. Although increasingly consumed by a passion for flying, Lauda remained for the time being a racing driver, pure and simple, and a good one at that. He won in Germany and Holland, and although beaten by Mario Andretti's Lotus at Monza, he received wild acclamation after the race, having done enough to guarantee himself a second world title. As they celebrated Lauda's latest success in time-honoured fashion, the Tifosi had mixed emotions, for it was clear that the man who had done so much to revitalise Ferrari in the past 4 years, winning 2 Drivers' Championships and spearheading a run of 3 consecutive victories in the Constructors' Championship, would not be staying on to try to add to that tally. Lauda had signed for the Brabham Alfa Romeo team. Just as his arrival at Ferrari had marked the dawn of a new era, so his departure marked its end. Devoted chief mechanic Ermanno Chioggi followed him to Brabham, and close friend Santagadini also jumped ships. On paper, the Brabham deal looked to offer Lauda the chance of further World Championship honours. Designer Gordon Murray's innovative chassis had returned the team to the winner's circle in the mid-70s, and the Alfa engine was fast enough, though fragile, when introduced in 1976. In its second season, the whole package was expected to gel, to produce solid results, and Lauda's arrival as teammate to John Watson looked to be just the catalyst the team needed. There was added spice too, for Lauda was keen to show that Ferrari had needed him more than he needed them. He started the year in spirited fashion, taking second place in Argentina and a third in Brazil, pole position in South Africa, and finishing second once again in Monte Carlo. His first victory for Brabham came in mid-season at Anderstorp, Sweden, but it was a success tinged with controversy. In Formula One, the art of ground effects, the ability to suck the car to the ground through clever use of aerodynamics, was all the rage, the trend started by Lotus's legendary innovator Colin Chapman. Brabham designer Gordon Murray had ideas of his own for increasing adhesion. To the general surprise of the motor racing world, the Brabham BT46-2 was unveiled with a huge fan mounted at the rear, its purpose being quite literally to suck the car to the track. In this one race, the Brabham proved to be more than a match for Mario Andretti's habitually dominant Lotus, giving Lauda his first win since leaving Ferrari. Shortly after the race, however, the fan car concept was deemed to be illegal, although the Austrian's win was allowed to stand. As an aside to his Brabham commitments in 1979, Lauda also raced in the BMW Pro Car Championship, most of the rounds acting as curtain raisers to Grand Prix throughout Europe. The sensational BMW M1 gave Lauda a refresher course in recognising the checkered flag. He won 3 races for the Project 4 team, managed by the ambitious Ron Dennis, who would play an important role in Lauda's Grand Prix career a few years hence. For the time being, his success in the Pro Car Series, which he won, provided light relief in the midst of a disappointing Formula One campaign. Retirement followed retirement. Jody Scheckter and Gilles Villeneuve emerged as the dominant force in their Ferraris. Youthful new Brabham recruit Nelson Piquet often outpaced his elder teammate. While Ferrari headed for a championship 1-2, Lauda scored just 3 championship points. However, he saved the most sensational aspect of his season until the end. During practice for the Canadian Grand Prix, penultimate race of the year, he calmly left the circuit and announced that he'd had enough of driving around in circles. Despite his absence from the Formula One spotlight, Lauda remained a familiar public figure. His preoccupation with aviation led him to embark upon an ambitious business venture, Lauda Air, a private airline that would become a prolific charter operator in the course of time. Lauda overcoming bureaucratic obstacles with characteristic single-mindedness. Happy in his new life, Lauda kept away from Grand Prix racing completely, save for a token appearance on behalf of Austrian TV at the Üsterich Ring in 1980. Less expectedly, he turned up in 1981 at the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola. Disembarking from a helicopter, he was met by his old pal Santa Gadini. Passing virtually unnoticed through the crowds on the back of a Vespa scooter, he made his way inconspicuously to the pits to renew old acquaintances. The Brabham garage was his first port of call. Later in the year, Ron Dennis, now the driving force behind McLaren, made a car available for Lauda to test at Donington Park, well away from the public gaze.
What are the rumours that you may be returning to Grand Prix Formula One racing sponsored by Parmalat?
I'm here in Donington because as a Sunday driver, I drive on Sundays. Today is Wednesday and I'd like to drive on a Wednesday. That's about it.
So you're here purely for a bit of Formula One driving experience. There's no intention of returning to the Formula One Grand Prix scene?
As I've done motor racing for the last 10 years, I asked Ron Dennis if he has a car available just to run. This was the car which is available on a Wednesday, so therefore I drove it. And from now on, I will see what the future will bring.
There's been very strict security here at Donington. Obviously, a lot of people want to see Niki Lauda back in Grand Prix racing. Can you really tell us quite honestly, straight to camera, that you have not decided to come back into Grand Prix Formula One racing?
I can tell you straight to camera that I have not decided nothing.
If you come back into Formula One Grand Prix racing, will you come back with McLaren?
I have not decided anything, so I don't know.
Well, let me ask you one last thing. Would you yourself personally like to come back into motor racing, and what would motivate you to come back into the sport?
I've told you before, I have no idea in the moment. I'm a Wednesday driver, and I like it here because the sun is out and it's nice weather here in Donington. That's about it.
But the motivation, there must be some motivation for you to drive a Formula One car, even to test here at Donington today.
Full motivation is the Wednesday.
Despite the interviewer's persistence, Niki remained tight-lipped about the possibilities of a racing comeback. In truth, of course, he'd already made his mind up. Despite having belittled the sport when he walked away in Canada, some reports indicated that he was beginning to miss it. More cynical observers suggested that he needed the money in the wake of financial troubles that had beset his airline. Following the test at Donington, Lauda was soon back out again with McLaren at Paul Ricard. An official announcement followed not long afterwards. 2 years after quitting the sport, apparently disillusioned, Lauda was back. The Austrian's multi-year contract with Marlboro was believed to be worth several $1 million. Lauda returned to Formula One and walked straight into controversy. The South African Grand Prix was marked by a driver's strike. The racers unhappy about proposed contractual changes which would prevent them from switching teams mid-season. Despite his absence from the scene, Lauda quickly emerged as one of the drivers' main spokesmen. Once the dispute was resolved, Lauda proved that his driving skills were every inch a match for his powers of negotiation. He finished fourth. In Brazil, he qualified fifth but crashed out of the race. Success, though, was not far away, although few could have imagined that it would take him so little time to return to the winner's circle. At Long Beach in the third round of the championship, Lauda battled it out with the Alfa Romeo of Andrea de Cesaris before passing and going on to win, proof, if ever it were needed, of his enduring qualities as a champion. Those who doubted the wisdom of his comeback were forced to eat their words. Lauda was in peak form as a driver, and perhaps even better as a man. Certainly he was more relaxed and more approachable than the Lauda of yore. In short, it was a new Lauda, his skills undiminished by a 2-year sabbatical. By 1982, however, it was clear that to mount a serious challenge for future world championships, you'd need a turbo engine. Lauda won the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch in his naturally aspirated McLaren Cosworth. But behind the scenes, Porsche technicians were shaping McLaren's immediate future. 1982 would be the last time that a driver won the championship with a naturally aspirated car, until the turbos were finally banned at the end of 1988. McLaren showed off its new turbo engine at a freezing cold Silverstone, when the tag Porsche was demonstrated in front of a small but select band of press representatives. The engine's tag prefix came from the name of the Arabian-owned company, Technique d'Avant-Garde, one of McLaren's principal sponsors, which commissioned Porsche to design and build a Formula One engine.
Per me oggi parte una nuova vita perché c'è un nuovo motore di sviluppare, per me piace molto, perché adesso il nostro potenziale con un motore turbo è il potenziale come gli altri. Il motore aspirato come noi usato anche adesso, il potenziale non c'è, so anche andare come un matto non serve perché c'è sempre il turbo davanti. Adesso le basi come le altre, quando noi lavoriamo bene, vediamo sicuro la possibilità di vincere.
For Lauda and McLaren, 1983 was a year of consolidation, a year on which to build for the future. Starting off with the trusty Cosworth, Lauda obtained some creditable results, third in Brazil and second to teammate John Watson in a memorable 1-2 at Long Beach. But there were also conspicuous off days. Neither qualified in Monaco, for instance. The new engine was kept back until it was felt to be ready for its race debut. Finally, at the Dutch Grand Prix, Lauda was entrusted with the Hans Metzger-designed turbocharged V6, though he retired with brake trouble. The balance of the year was spent developing the new package, Watson and Lauda usually qualifying around midfield, although reliability was initially hard to come by. After such modest beginnings, the domination of the McLaren tag in 1984 could not have been foreseen. Although during the previous year's final event in South Africa, Lauda had briefly managed to nose into the lead, which proved to be a good omen. Furthermore, McLaren had signed Alain Prost.
Je crois que c'est difficile pour moi de dire, mais je crois que Niki est quand même le plus fort, certainement. À tous les points de vue, il est très très fort. Mise au point de voiture, dire un peu, de pousser très très fort quand il veut quelque chose dans l'équipe. Sur la piste, il fait jamais de faute, il est très très fort.
The Frenchman immediately gave the opposition a taste of what the team had been up to during the close season, taking a comfortable victory in Brazil. Lauda was to retire in Brazil after qualifying in the top 6, the Austrian succumbing to electrical problems after this brief brush with Derek Warwick's Renault. Most people in motor racing remember the 1984 season clearly. Prost won 7 Grand Prix, but still lost the World Championship title to Lauda, who beat his teammate to the prize for the sake of a measly half point. Niki won 5 races: South Africa, France, Great Britain, Austria and Italy. Consistent performances in several other races were enough to give the Austrian a 3rd World Championship. It was a memorable campaign, amicably waged between 2 of the sport's leading personalities. The TAG Porsche engine was more than fulfilling its initial promise. This was exemplified in the South African Grand Prix, where Lauda progressed smoothly through the field from 8th place on the grid to chalk up his first victory of the year. Prost finished 2nd, and such was McLaren's margin of superiority that they were the only 2 cars to go the full distance. Not all of the Austrians' performances were to be so well received, however. At Imola, where he retired with a blown engine, he was roundly jeered by the same fans who had idolised his every lap only a few years before. Generally, the two McLarens were dominant in race trim, Lauda maintaining his challenge for the championship with accomplished victories in the middle of the year at Dijon, where he started 9th, at Brands Hatch, on home soil at the Oostenrijk Ring, the first and only time he was to win his home Grand Prix, and in front of the baying tifosi at Monza. There were, of course, occasional hiccups. But this quick spin at the Nürburgring in October was only a minor setback, and he remained a forceful championship contender.
Niki Lauda, è vero che hai già rinnovato il contratto per la prossima stagione con McLaren?
Sì, ho firmato un contratto martedì primo questa corsa lì.
Ed è vero che guadagnerai meno di questa stagione?
Sì.
Perché?
Perché la moneta per i piloti in questo periodo è molto meno perché il motore costa di più e questa è una cosa normale.
Sei d'accordo quando sui giornali si legge che Niki Lauda è il personaggio più popolare della Formula 1?
Io non lo so, io ho uno dei 26 piloti e questa è la mia parte.
Ma perché credi di essere così popolare, il personaggio numero 1 che attira più attenzione?
Io non lo so.
Ripensando al tuo passato, c'è qualcosa che non rifaresti?
No, io provo sempre di vivere una vita al mio limite e in questo momento io contento e non c'è problema.
Qual è la cosa più importante nella tua vita?
In questo momento vince questo campionato perché io ho lavorato tutto l'anno per questo, adesso vediamo.
In Portugal, where he needed second place to be sure of the title, Marlena, his wife since March 1976, and mother of two fair-haired sons, Lucas and Matthias, made her first appearance at a racetrack for many years, in accordance with her husband's express wishes. Niki had to fight his way through from 11th place on the grid, while Prost started from the front row and eventually cruised to victory. Millions of TV spectators were kept on tenterhooks as Lauda worked his way through the field. The canny Austrian timed his run to perfection. Second place and that third championship crown were his.
Per me personalmente la decisione di oggi strana, perché c'è un rischio, capito? Perché
Prost's day would come. Back-to-back championships are a relatively rare thing in motor racing, and Lauda was no exception to this particular rule. 1985 was to be a lean season, vastly different to the 12 months that had gone before. As Prost built up a mammoth points total, one that would take him to his first world title, Lauda suffered a succession of retirements. Lauda was happy though, a man at ease with himself. There was talk that this would be his last season, and on August the 17th, on the eve of the Austrian Grand Prix, where he had first raced in Formula One 14 years previously, he announced that he was once again retiring from the sport as a driver, this time for good. And at this time the announcement was made at a pre-arranged press conference, in stark contrast to his sudden departure from the Canadian Grand Prix 5 years previously. "I've given over 11 years of my life to Formula One," he explained at the conference. "I've loved and still do love racing cars, but I no longer have the desire to continue. Next year, therefore, I will not be racing." Thus Niki Lauda explained his imminent departure from the sport. But there were other races still to run and old friends to meet, such as Clay Regazzoni, the Swiss-Italian, who had been confined to a wheelchair after an accident at Long Beach in 1980. There was to be just one more victory on Lauda's CV, and that came in Holland, where he fended off teammate Prost by just 1/5 of a second after an epic duel. In a year pockmarked by endless retirements, it was to be the outstanding highlight. Wrist injury, sustained during qualifying at Spa-Francorchamps, forced him to miss the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, and Lauda's Formula One career ultimately concluded quietly, although he almost bowed out in a blaze of glory. He retired with turbo failure in South Africa before taking his final bow in the first Australian Grand Prix on the highly acclaimed street circuit in Adelaide. After his usual moderate practice effort, he started only 16th. Lauda outbraked Ayrton Senna to take the lead just after half distance. On lap 56, however, he vacated his McLaren's cockpit for the final time and walked away to concentrate upon his airline and other expanding business interests, after brake trouble sent him skittering into the concrete retaining wall. Born in Vienna on February the 22nd, 1949, Andreas Nikolaus Lauda made a surreptitious start in motor racing, entering a Mini Cooper S for a hill climb and finishing second in class. A season in Formula V followed. He rolled out of his second race at Aspen, but gained useful experience. That preceded a move up to the highly competitive world of Formula 3, a source of more useful racecraft and a handful of top six finishes. In 1971, he joined the March Formula 2 team and contested the European Championship. In mid-season, he also made his Formula 1 debut in his home Grand Prix. Staying with March for 1972, he had an incredibly busy schedule, contesting both a full Formula 1 World Championship programme, a European Formula 2 season, and in between times winning the British Formula 2 Championship. In truth, Lauda saved his very best form for Formula 1. Despite his modest record in the junior formulae, the statistics of his Grand Prix career put him up amongst the all-time greats. In 171 Grand Prix, Lauda took 25 victories, set 25 fastest laps, claimed 24 pole positions, and started from the front row of the grid on 31 occasions. In addition, there were 20 second places, 9 thirds, 7 fourths, 7 fifths, and 5 sixths. To complete the record of one of the sport's great champions, Lauda amassed an impressive total of 420.5 championship points, the first of them at Zolder in 1973, the last of them in his final Formula 1 victory on a sunny August afternoon in Holland.